its way.
Okay. Great. I see that the recording has started. It is now 9:02 and I'm calling the July 28th meeting of the Working Group on the Status of Libraries in Vermont to order. My name is Catherine Delnau. I am the Working Group Chair and the State Librarian and Commissioner of the Department of Libraries. And I want to welcome all of the working group members and department staff who are on the call to the meeting, as well as any guests who are in attendance. And I know folks may still be showing up, so we're going to start roll call with I think it's alphabetical. Okay, here we go. Meg Allison. See, might get. Oh, I want to also give the caveat, there have been lots and lots of extra things going on in people's professional lives lately and in some of our personal lives lately as well. And I may have missed an email from somebody who let me know they weren't able to make it today. So if somebody's not here, it's likely that they told me already they wouldn't be here. So I'll say that before we do roll call. Maria Avery.
I am here. Good morning.
Good morning. Jeanette Bear.
I'm here.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hello.
Jeanette, before we move to the next person on the list, who's me actually, can you send me an email from your new email account? Because I'm afraid that somehow we have the wrong one on
I've
file.
been getting them.
You've been getting them. Oh, okay. We have
Yes.
the right one. Okay, perfect.
But I will anyway.
Okay, if you've been getting things, then don't worry about it. But for some reason, I had a weird worry that I was typing the wrong thing. Denise Hersey.
I'm here.
Great. I think Christopher is not going to be with us today. And I think Andy is not going to be with us today. Kelly McCagg.
I am here.
Great. Karen McCullough.
I am also here.
Wonderful. Susan O'Connell.
I'm here.
Great. And then Wendy Sharkey let me know that she was not able to be with us today. Next, I'm gonna call on members of the department who are present, and I'll just call your names, and if you can put your cameras on for a second and say hi, if you're in a place you can do that, please do. Tom McMurdo.
Good morning, everyone.
Jeanette Schaefer.
Good morning.
Josh Muse.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here.
April Shaw.
Good morning.
Lauren Kelly.
Lauren's on vacation.
Oh, thanks. Karen Graflin. See Karen waving for the record. Joy Warland.
Good morning.
Jonathan Clark.
Good morning.
Kevin Unrath.
Good morning, everyone.
Lily Talbert.
Good morning.
And our intrepid note taker, Gina Rubin.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Is there anybody present, any members of the public or other members of the department present, or working group members who arrived while I was taking roll call who have not yet said hello and introduced themselves for the minutes? Okay. Well, in that case, I want to just, since we're not going to have general public comment, I want to provide some context for the record about this meeting before we get started. And working group members, please feel free to come on camera, or anybody else, because I feel a little bit funny just looking at a sea of off cameras right now. So I just wanted to share how this topic got added. So in March 2023, the House Committee on Education asked me to testify on miscellaneous Senate Bill 133, and specifically on language that would add the topic of gun safety in libraries to the charge of our working group. I provided them with testimony on this bill on March 15th, 2023. And during that meeting, I learned that we were being asked to add this topic because a library director in the state expressed a concern about the potential for open carry in public libraries. I also provided testimony on this bill to the Senate Committee on Education. That took place on April 19th, 2023. During both sets of testimony, I explained to our legislators that the topic of gun safety is very narrow and that our working group is not expert in gun safety in libraries. I further explained that we do regularly have conversations in libraries of all types about the broader topic of safety in libraries, both public safety and staff safety. I expressed that we were willing to incorporate this topic into our working group report, and even that we had heard some comments on the topic of safety in previous meetings that we could consider as part of the report on the topic of safety. In addition to being asked to add this topic at the request of a member of the community of their legislator, I had also been informed by Assistant State Librarian Jeanette Schaefer that this topic was of importance to the large libraries group. I understand from talking with Jeanette that the large libraries group, which she convenes, had specifically asked the working group to have a meeting on this topic and asked when that was happening. As you can imagine, I was anticipating that we would be inundated with written comments and requests to provide oral comments to the working group, which we were not. In fact, we have received no written comments, and nobody from the public or the library community is here in addition to our membership. Usually, as the chair of the working group, I've been taking a really active role in coaxing and prodding our library community to speak on topics. To be honest, this has been a huge lift. I've never been a working group chair before, but it feels like we're planning a mini conference. And I think that has helped the working group have the information we need. I think if I were to lead a working group in the future, I would try to get the working group members more involved in doing that themselves instead of just me, Jeanette, Tom, and then whichever consultant had expertise on the topic, because it's been really challenging to host these. So it's been a big lift, and on other topics, it seemed to make sense. But after careful consideration, I decided I should not prompt people to speak on this topic, because we've already seen that when talking about safety in libraries, some members of our community have demonstrated a degree of trauma response. I didn't want anybody in the library community or the public to feel that the state librarian was reaching out to them and saying, you need to share your personal trauma in our public meeting setting. That felt very inappropriate. In this particular situation, we also felt that nobody in the department could identify true experts in the way that we've had experts on other topics. The other experts have been talking about data. We don't collect data on this topic at the Department of Libraries. Everything that happens at Vermont's libraries is individual. Any safety and security concerns are dealt with by the trustees or the boards or the school leadership, by the directors and the librarians at those sites. Any safety concerns are reported to local police or security in institutions. We don't have much to present. And it's hard to find nationally an expert. There are a lot of people there are some people who provide national trainings, but I wouldn't want to say I know which of them is the best or the expert. And it's not our responsibility here for me to provide you with a training. That's something slightly different. So as the trainings have many different perspectives, it just didn't feel right for me or department leadership to select one or two experts as representative voices. I this next part is like, I've drafted this, so I've gotten to the next part, and I'm just going to pause for a second to collect my thoughts. I have in my career worked in different settings outside of Vermont, including a suburban but large population library in New Jersey. And then I've spent many years in a large urban public library environment, first as a branch manager, then at the main library, and then overseeing 27 neighborhood branch libraries. I have experienced a great deal of security incidents, some of which were violent and left me with residual trauma, both as an initial service provider and as an administrator who felt very responsible for what was happening with my staff. And there were assaults, there were verbal abuse, and it's gotten, maybe in the experience I was having is it was getting worse, but it has always been a problem. And I had found in my 100-plus-year-old branch a letter from a state librarian a city librarian in San Francisco that was on onion skin paper and typed out about librarians being harassed by the public from like the first, I want to say it was from like the 1917 era. This is not a new topic. I have extensive experience with the topic of public safety in public libraries and staff safety in public libraries. And I also know that my trauma is personal to me, and I really don't want to share any more than this in a public meeting. And that really informed my decision not to poke and prod at our Vermont community members to speak on this topic. I left it to Vermont librarians, trustees, and community members to decide if they felt comfortable sharing their experiences and their concerns about safety in libraries. I sent out a call for written comments from the community on June 20th, 2023, the same step I always take. The department did not receive any written comments from the community for consideration by the working group. So I want to acknowledge that our agenda is light today, as no members of the Vermont library community or organizations that support library staff and trustees in the state have shared their thoughts with the working group in advance of our meeting. The agenda does provide space for the public to speak today, and I'm hopeful that some members of the public will show up and come forward with oral comments during our meeting. If they do not, that is very understandable due to the challenges of discussing this topic in a public meeting. The topic of safety in libraries is very important to me. I feel that all members of the public should feel safe and welcome in every library. I feel that all staff in libraries deserve a respectful, peaceful, and safe working environment. And like you, I think I can say that we all recognize these desires are aspirational. I want to just acknowledge again that librarians have long been challenged to ensure public safety, and that trustees have long been challenged to ensure staff safety and administrators as well in our libraries. My sense is that this concern of day-to-day safety is probably most prevalent in public libraries. However, school and academic environments also have safety challenges on a day-to-day basis, and have historically, we're seeing that there is often a more extreme safety challenge in school settings, including the potential for gun violence. I encourage each working group member to consider their unique perspectives serving Vermonters in libraries, and consider your roles as representatives of your community to this public body. I also want to acknowledge that each of you likely has your own experiences that are very unpleasant and very difficult to talk about. And I am not asking or expecting that any of you shared those specifics with us today, although we will certainly hold space for you if you choose to do so. Given the lack of comments or the scarcity of comments that are specific, we may end up keeping our conversation general today and thinking about the broad topics of safety in libraries and what recommendations we can make to Vermont legislators to improve the safety for public and for library staff. And I just shared a big, long prepared statement. So if you all, if anyone has a response to that, even though it's not really on the agenda week, I'm happy to open it up to working group members to share any response or reaction you may have. Kelly?
I did want to say thank you for sharing your experience, and I do appreciate that a lot of people have had negative and traumatic experiences with in regards to this topic. I've had some, but none of them have particularly included firearms per se. I have given this, though, some thought prior to the meeting, because I know you had said that the the inspiration for this was that there was talk about, um, you know, restricting firearms in, public libraries or in libraries in general. And I don't know if I'm playing devil's advocate or what, but I want us to think about the fact that libraries are supposed to be welcoming for all, and that we live in a very rural state. And not where I work, but where I live, it is not unusual to walk into the grocery store and to see someone carrying a handgun. And that whereas this is not typically the demographic that I serve in my library, I think it's very important that we don't do anything to make that demographic feel that a library is not for them. I've made a concerted effort since our prior president was elected, to include more people who are not like myself in my social circles and in groups that I talk to. Um, and um, I'm not sure if anything of what I'm saying here is making sense, but I think I think it's important that I think a lot of us represent one side of the fence, and that we're cognizant and aware of the other side, and that, we try very hard to make sure that certain people feel welcome and safe in the library. And I think it's important that we are just as aware that law-abiding people who also feel it is their right to carry a firearm um, feel that same safety and that same welcoming. I don't particularly own firearms, and I'm not of that, Ben, but um, I don't want us to bring our own biases into this. So that's it.
Thanks, Kelly. I want to, so there are two hands up, Karen and then Denise, and I think we'll want to really bear what you just shared, Kelly, in mind during our working group discussion, which is later in the agenda. And if there are other thoughts that are really, let's think about if it's hard to frame them this way, but if you've got comments for the working group discussion, we might want to hang on to them till that agenda item. But please jot them down. And I actually thought about making my comments at the working group discussion point, but then I thought I should mention it because it was agenda related and we were about to go into the changes to the agenda topic. Karen?
So I originally raised my hand because I just wanted to give you extra long distance hugs for, I know that was a hard statement to share, and how this is intersecting with your own personal experiences. So I wanted to recognize that. And I think I'll save the rest of what I was going to say for the working group discussion later.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to topic 3, which is, I want to be sure before we move to topic 3 that there are no members of the public who wish to speak at this time. Is that correct? My sense is there are no members of the public who are here. It's just working group and department staff. I'd like to propose a change to the agenda because initially I thought the department didn't have anything specific to share on the topic of public safety. As I mentioned, we don't have any data that we collect and we don't have any surveys, and I don't think it would be appropriate for us to begin surveying and collecting data on this topic, particularly because we don't have specific resources to offer. But we do have information about safety in libraries that the department has shared, some general information on safety. Our continuing education consultant, Joy Warland, has pulled together a brief presentation, and I'd like for Joy to be able to share that with you, just because sometimes we get into the conversation and people say, we should do blah, 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 and we should have blah, 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 and maybe front loading with what we've got already, what message is already getting out there would be a good way to think about it. And I know that there have been some good trainings provided, some good resources that Joy and the other consultants use in referring people, and then some good messaging around safety, particularly in small libraries, because we've heard about the one library and phenomenon at times. So if people are comfortable, I'd like to have after approval of the minutes and before public comment on safety, from 9:40 to 10, a presentation from Joy Warland on behalf of the department related to public safety, continuing education resources, really. Does that sound okay to folks? Seeing head nods. Okay, great. So we'll make that change to the agenda. Did anyone else want to propose any changes to the agenda today? And I do think as long as we I want to make a suggestion that if a member of the public shows up and we're in the middle of something, we pause and take their testimony, because we may get ahead of the agenda with our working group discussion. And I think we should take our break at 10:30, kind of regardless of where we are in the agenda. Does that, we need to be a little flexible, because if somebody shows up, we certainly don't want them to have to sit through everything. But we know that so far we've got nobody extra showing up. Okay. Great. So Gina will note those changes, and we'll have the final agenda that's posted reflect what happened today. And we can move to agenda item 4, which is the approval of the minutes of the May 26, 2023 meeting. Did everybody get those minutes in advance and have a chance to review them? Great. Okay. Can we get a motion to approve them, and then a second, and then we can discuss?
I'll move to approve.
Thanks, Denise.
I
I'll second.
that.
Okay, so Denise approved and then Susan seconded. And let's move into discussion. If there are any comments or suggestions, questions, or revisions, please put your hand up and we will call on you. I will call on you. I'm just one person. I'm not seeing any. Does that mean Gina nailed it? Okay, I'm not hearing any comments for revision or suggestions to improve these draft minutes of our May 26th meeting. I will call a vote. All in favor of approving them as written, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. I think, did anybody abstain? Okay, so these are unanimously approved. We are just moving along. I want to thank Gina for her awesome work with the minutes. She certainly makes it easier for me to chair this group. And it's really nice to have Gina doing this to support us rather than having to have that farmed out to each of the working group members. So thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. Thanks, everybody.
And now, slightly ahead of schedule, I want to turn it over to Joy. Joy, do you want to come on camera? And you've got a PowerPoint.
I do. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here.
And while you're getting that up, I want to share, it's got I've learned in my life about something called, oh, I forget what the name of it is now, but there's the idea that like looking at things in nature soothes us as humans. And so this is a wood-grained topic. When we were pulling this together, it was like, oh, let's do something a little bit soothing as we think about safety, because I know that this is a tough topic. And I appreciate Joy jumping in and being ready to share on this topic what the department has been messaging and the work she's been doing. So thank you, Joy.
Yeah, thanks for giving me this chance to do this. And I'm just going to add, not to be flippant or anything, but there's a nice golden hue to this wood grain too. So I think that is also brings a sort of peaceful feeling to this. So the goals of this short presentation are just to talk about what we've done as a department in terms of training, and also my other position at the department is small and rural libraries consultant, and a lot of the training we do is for small and rural libraries, and a lot of the safety issues manifest in unique ways in small libraries, as many of you know, because of the tiny staffs. And we're just going to talk about a few of those things. The general safety tips, that they're kind of tiny on there, aren't they? But they basically are, they're quite general, and there's some of them are kind of obvious, but they do apply to small libraries in a different way. Some of the rural libraries are in places where there's no police force. There are some libraries where people are working one person at a time. There's also sometimes kind of a casual approach to safety in the smaller libraries, which is out of an effort of the intention is to create a really warm, welcoming place and be kind of casual about things like who has a key to the library, for example. I mean, I know that there are libraries that don't even know all the people in town who might have a key to their library, and most of the time that's fine, and occasionally it could not be. And I feel like, having worked in a small library, and some of the things that I hear from small library directors, it's like we're lucky worse things haven't happened than have. I mean, because there's these situations that usually turn out fine, but when you start to think about them through this lens of safety, it could have been bad. And the department in our trainings with trustees and directors we're always encouraging librarians to not work alone, and if they can at all find any way to avoid that, to do that. But the reality is that sometimes they just can't. So we just are talking in the trainings about being aware of who's in the library, looking at your sight lines. The other thing is that some of the small libraries only have one working door. They have like crevices and stuff that, where they were created 100 years ago when sight lines weren't an issue, and that's true in larger libraries as well. But again, just thinking about that more, and if you're alone or if there's only one other person in the library, you just can't see in all the spaces the same way you can in a place with bigger staff. So other things are that I've seen happen very casually in smaller libraries is there can be like a box for just putting donations for the libraries, or printing money, or it's just right out there where people can see it. I know that that's been an issue, or like somebody's counting that money in public. Some librarians don't even have an office, so they're doing those sort of administrative things that sometimes someone would do in a private office. They're doing them basically at the circulation desk. So that's something to think about as well. So one of the other things that we've talked about in training is having a list of people that you can call. So if you're in a really isolated area that perhaps doesn't have a police force, and you might be alone or just there with one other person, knowing who's around you, like if there's trustees that live nearby, having a list of them and their contact information, maybe even having a schedule of like a trustee's sort of on call for 1 day a week. Also knowing the businesses that are open. Libraries often have hours that are in the evening, and if they're in an isolated area, there just might not be a lot of people around. I know that one of the libraries I worked in had a convenience store across the street, and they knew when we were there, they knew what our hours were, and they were prepared to take a call from us if, like, I'm over here alone and there's something weird happening at the library. Can you send somebody over, or even just to come in and pretend they were being a patron, so that the people at the library weren't as vulnerable. It's really important to document incidents when they happen, and we do in our trainings. We have a sample document in this slide, and talk to people about best practices for that. And then other resources like the Vermont League of Cities and Towns can help for municipal libraries. We encourage libraries to get training from places like the Howard Center, or we're doing hosting some training actually from Washington County Mental Health Services later this fall. And I know that other libraries have had trainings from organizations like that as well. So, you don't have to do it alone is one of the key things. And then just a few more thoughts about the one-person libraries. One of the things that's really, really important is that librarians explain to their trustees how vulnerable they really are, and that it really is not okay for one person to be in a building like a library all by themselves. And again, a lot of times it just has to be a workaround. There might not be a capacity in terms of staffing, volunteers, or funding to have more than one staff person there, but just get creative about not being there alone. And then again, I just can't emphasize enough how much it's important for the trustees to understand that, because they might not really have an understanding of how vulnerable the staff is. And again, we stress that in our trainings that we do for trustees, but it's really important to hear it from the people working as well. And the other thing about just a lot of this kind of knowledge comes from experience. It's not necessarily like you learn it from a book or whatever, but you learn it because you've actually been in a one-person library. And so it's really important that the experienced librarians share that with other newer people who might not think of it, or they might have worked in bigger libraries where there was a sort of hierarchy of safety and administration, and a police force to call that's right down the street, and suddenly they've moved to Vermont and they're in a tiny library, and it's a really different situation. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with these things, but just the having a panic button, having lighting, really good lighting around the libraries. So these are all things that we have incorporated into some of our trainings. Again, for both directors and trustees. I'm just going to go ahead to some of the resources. We have quite a few books in the department collection about library security, and then we regularly share different webinar recordings and different resources for getting training from other people. So again, I'm not going to go over everything that's on these slides, but this is just an example of the resources that we share in our trainings and that are relevant to this topic. The last slide is just the providing some of the training that we do. We have a Niche Academy as our online platform of continuing education resources, and there are quite a few things on Niche Academy, either from us or from other providers that are on this topic, including a recording from about a year ago, specifically about library security. We do have a training coming up in the fall on mental health first aid for youth, but we're also going to get Washington County mental health also. We're working on a more broad training from them that's more specifically about dealing with patrons and not necessarily just dealing with youth mental health, but difficult interactions and de-escalation. I want to say also that like a lot of times de-escalation training is on a scale that is maybe not that relatable to somebody working in one of these situations where they might be the only person. I know that, we're a female dominated profession in public libraries anyway. And I know that as a female person of small stature, that's also is something that comes up, because a lot of that de-escalation training has to do with like body language and having a sense of sort of physical authority that's really hard to manifest if you're a small woman. And I think that I see this coming up, I hear this from other librarians as well, that they're in situations where they go to a training and it's all pretty theoretical, because you don't necessarily have this sense of sort of physical dominance. So one of the things that we talk about in our trainings a lot is to not be in your office alone, like to get up and stand up and walk out and be where other people are with you, so that you have a sense of a little bit more body language that feels a little bit more authoritative, and also again that you're not alone. So I just wanted to reference that because I think it's real, and I think that it gets overlooked sometimes, I think, in sort of the traditional training that about de-escalation. So in order to make it relatable to people that are in our Vermont libraries that are actually doing the work, we need to recognize that this is the individual kind of thing that a person has to feel confident doing, and that's different for everybody. So back to the safety training providers. Library Journal and School Library Journal has some excellent trainings. Library 2.0 has a lot of things about this, and they are somewhat, I think, controversial. Sometimes they are not considered to be as maybe trauma informed as some other training might be, but they do offer a lot of training within that. PLA does a lot, and then the a training continuing education resource that I really love is the University of Wisconsin Information School has a whole continuing education wing separate of their master's degree program. And most of those have fees associated with them, but they do have really good information. And I think that's about all I have. I just wanted to put in the plug for the small and rural perspective, and then also just to remind people that of the resources that we do have at the department. So thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joy. Okay, working group members, I want to open it up to questions and comments on the information that Joy shared, thoughts, and really it could be on anything related to what Joy shared and continuing education. Annette.
I just wanted to second everything that Joy said. As somebody that worked in a small library for almost 19 years alone, a 3-story building alone. Luck has a lot to do with it. State police are over a mountain away. You're on your own out there. And I think that's something that needs to be heard. And thank you so much, Joy.
Thanks, Jeanette. Others? Okay. Usually when there are no comments, it's because somebody did such an amazing job with their presentation. And Joy, I just want to give you credit for the great work you're doing to support libraries with continuing education, but particularly small and rural libraries. And that part of your role, you really hear, I feel like you really hear librarians in small rural communities, as Jeanette was just expressing. You've shared those concerns, which are important for the working group to consider in our conversation later in the agenda. So thank you. And Joy, I think you're sticking around this afternoon, or not this afternoon. We're all not sticking around this afternoon. You're sticking around for the rest of the morning, and we may call on you if we have any questions about things you've heard or
Thanks.
things that you're addressing. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Okay, I want to check who's here. Jeanette Bear, I'm gonna lower your hand because I still see it up. And I'm looking to see if anyone else has joined us, because we are now able to move into the public comment on safety in libraries. I want to acknowledge that we are 20 minutes ahead of schedule. So it could be the case that people are planning to arrive at 10. I want to check group members. I think we can still do this. Do we want to take a break now and reconvene at 10 to try to just keep kind of on schedule-ish, since we have about 20 minutes till 10 o'clock when people might show up? Or actually, hang on. Let me look at the original agenda.
My agenda says 9:40 is public comments, but maybe it's an older agenda.
That was the original, and we revised it at the beginning of the meeting. So we should be seeing them now. So let's just proceed. Let's do, sorry to get confused by the multi-agendas. Since we don't see anybody here for public comment on safety in libraries, And I want to just say, this could also be if somebody in the group represents another group and wants to comment on public safety on behalf of that group, you could do that now too. For example, a library association, if somebody wanted to say anything on behalf of the organization they represent, that could happen now. It doesn't just have to be individuals. In that case, please raise your hand. But if we don't have that, then let's move to working group discussion on the topic of public safety in libraries. With a plan to discuss this for the next 45 minutes or so, and then take a break at 10:30. Karen McCullough.
Sorry, had to push all my buttons in the right order. I think now is the time that I want to respond to something that Kelly said earlier when we started the meeting about being welcoming to all our patrons. And I just wanted to share that while I am so on board with that, and I think there's lots of ways that we can be welcoming to patrons from lots of different backgrounds and have materials and programming and spaces that speak to them. There are not words for how inappropriate I think it is for guns to be in libraries.
Denise.
Thanks. This is such a thorny situation, particularly in today's world. And I guess I totally hear what Kelly was saying, but I also just want to point out that I can legally own a dog, but I cannot bring my dog into the library. So I don't think it's terribly unusual if we do restrict some material from our library for people bringing things into our library. And then, of course, there's always the flip side of if somebody is bringing a gun into the library, even they're legally allowed to, that also makes other people feel unsafe. So like whose safety, whose comfort do we prioritize? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Thanks, Denise. Jeanette?
I'll chime in here as well. I totally agree with Denise and Karen. You can legally own a lot of things that you cannot bring into the library, or, you know, be required to wear clothes in the library, you know, because other people in the library are impacted. You know, I had to finally ban all dogs in the library because of one person who insisted on bringing their snarling, mangy dog in, you know, terrorizing everybody else that was in the building at the time. So, yes, if there was a choice to be made about open carry in libraries, it would be a hard yes for a ban.
Just to clarify, Jeanette, would that also be for concealed carry or just for open carry?
There's not a lot we can do about concealed carry, because if it's truly concealed, we don't know they have it. But for open carry, yes, we can enforce just the way we enforced a requirement of wearing masks during COVID. Public safety.
Karen?
Sorry, I'm chiming in again. I just wanted to respond to Jeanette. I think it's still totally okay for us to say you cannot bring your gun in here, period. Whether you're trying to concealed carry or open carry, we can still say you are not welcome to bring a gun into our library in any way. And then sure, if we can't, there's lots of things that people do that we don't catch them doing or can't see them doing, where they're still breaking a rule, and that's unfortunate. In this case, it's extra unfortunate. It's extra dangerous. But I still think it's totally okay for us to say you can't, and then do with it what we can.
Agreed.
I have a, earlier I mentioned we're not experts on guns, we're librarians. And I have a question for school librarians and academic librarians, which is are there laws that prohibit firearms on, I'm thinking there are laws that prohibit firearms in schools, and is that a state law? And can anyone share that law in the chat? I'm going to call on Kevin Unrath.
Yeah, so you are not allowed to carry a gun into a school, into a courthouse, or into a hospital in Vermont. I believe those are the 3 specific restrictions, and I will put the links to the statute in the chat.
Oh, I think I just found it. Hang on. I think it's Title 13, weapons. Possession of a dangerous weapon in a school bus or school building or on school property is prohibited. Let me put that here. Sometimes I am librarian and sometimes it takes a minute. So thanks. I think this one applies. So right now, already in the state, one cannot bring a gun to a school library. And I believe that would cover both elementary, high school, and also academic libraries. Is that correct? Do you all know? Academic environment would fall within a school building or school property, right?
I don't know if it applies to higher education campuses. I will say, just as a point of clarification, our neighbor New York has a specific restriction on guns in libraries that is in statute, and we do not in Vermont.
I'm gonna, just because we mentioned some of the other locations, Kevin mentioned hospitals, and I see that is listed in the same chapter on weapons. Kevin, if you are able to locate the New York statute, that would be very helpful, I think, to the working group. And if you could just let me know when you could raise your hand to share that with us and pop it in the chat. Denise.
I just put in chat the policy for UVM, which clearly states no firearms on campus unless you are authorized as security or police. And I work in the health science library, and we are a branch library located right next to the hospital, including the ER. And there are times staff are alone. We're up until 11 o'clock at night during the school year. If the student worker doesn't show up, people are alone. It's still a concern that we have. And we did de-escalation training in my branch library. And like it was, I believe Joyce said, it's one thing to be trained. It's another thing, especially as a female alone, to try to manage that.
I see Susan O'Connell's hand is up. Oh, wait, before Susan, let's just close the loop on the New York legislation that Kevin put in the chat. I'm looking for the word library. Kevin, can you come on screen and share where that is? Because I'm having, oh, here it is,
Sure.
libraries, line 47.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely in there.
It
Let's
is,
see if
and
I
it's
can-
not library, it's libraries, which is why I
Oh,
couldn't do
okay.
a search. So I think I
Yeah.
found it, line 47 on page 8. Criminal possession of a firearm, rifle, or shotgun in a sensitive location. And sensitive location means any place owned or under control of federal, state, or local government for the purposes of government administration, including courts, and then, any look, and then it goes in D, libraries, public playgrounds, parks and zoos. The question is a little bit tricky in our state where, a library, I mean, this shows that the libraries in New York are protected in that they're publicly owned.
Yeah, I think that without trying to lawyer it too much, I
Oh,
think
no, it
that,
doesn't. It's
yeah,
any sensitive location. It's just libraries. A doesn't relate to D. Sorry.
right. I think the main point I would try to get across without trying to interpret the law is that there are very, very few restrictions on carrying a gun in the state of Vermont. And the only restrictions on open or concealed carry, as far as I can see, are schools, which includes universities, courthouses, and hospitals. So New York has a much more restrictive gun law in place, which indicates that it is federally possible to have such a law in place, but Vermont doesn't currently have that in place.
I do want to call out that this is a very recent law in New York. It's July 1st, 2022.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
Susan, do you
all.
want to, thanks, Kevin. Susan,
Yeah, I guess I wonder if this might be one of the situations where refraining from having a blanket recommendation for the entire state would be in our best interest, and ensuring that this decision is something that stays with individual libraries, I think might be really important. Vermont has vastly different libraries in different communities. I can imagine a hunter safety training course being held in some small communities and needing a place to go, and the library being the place where that would make the most sense to happen. That's a very different scenario than what we're thinking about and talking about. But if we're making a blanket recommendation, we would be including things like that. And that might not serve some of our smaller communities in the way that we intend.
other thoughts? I have a thought. I almost feel like I need to, oh, Jeanette.
Just responding to our last comment, I don't know if a specific library policy would be enforceable and questioned if there wasn't a state law permitting that kind of a policy.
Yeah, it might be deemed that the policy is unconstitutional. I don't know. Or the policy is in conflict with state law. You can't make up, well, I guess you can. You can say can't bring your dog in. We have all kinds of rules that are, but it may be
Unfortunately, dogs
challenged.
aren't protected the way
Kevin,
guns are.
can you, well, I'm just gonna have the working group talk right now. Thanks. Sorry, Jen, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I just said that, there's not the protection for dogs where they are for guns.
Yeah.
I think Susan raises a good point, though. I mean, in some small communities, the library may be the only place where there's an area for people to meet for something like a gun safety class. And so if, as a working group, we recommended the banning of, say, all firearms from public libraries, then that would mean that, they couldn't meet for that reason. like I said, I think we need to put our own personal opinions and biases aside and look at this from a, one level removed.
Well, a couple of, I'd like to share without the mental of being a member of the Agency of Administration, because I don't exactly, I think that we need to look at a couple of things as a working group. One is that we're not in charge of gun safety in the community. That's not our charge in libraries. Gun safety in the community is somebody else's charge. Public education, continuing, lifelong learning, those are things we're supportive of. But the number one thing we need to do in libraries is to ensure the public is safe in them so that the public can do what they need to do. And as a lot of us wear administrator hats, I think it's also important to think about administrator and trustee hats. I think that it's important to really think about the obligation for staff safety as well. So that's just something to think about, like what's the goal of the library? It's sort of like financial responsibility is not our goal. So finding kids so that they understand responsibility is not the role of the library. Gun safety is really not the role of the library. But the other issue, and in the same way, like part of me feels like, well, if a hunter leaves his, or if the hunter leaves their gun in the car while they go to the library and then somebody takes the gun and does something wacky with it, was that because they came to the library? I think we need to sort of put that to the side because that's not our responsibility. They should have a method of going places and keeping their gun responsibly secured. My general feeling is that statute often gets confused about the role of libraries. And I want to point people back to state statute about how we are essential and in what way. And I'm going to just pull it up right now because I'm going to misquote it. But when we look at the statute about public libraries, we see this language, the statement of policy indicates that we're essential. It says the General Assembly declares it to be the policy of the state of Vermont that free public libraries are essential to the general enlightenment of citizens in a democracy, and that every citizen of the state should have access to the educational, cultural, recreational, informational, and research benefits of a free public library. To me, the library is an educational institution. And I think that gets forgotten, that a municipal or an incorporated public library is a piece of our educational institution as determined by the legislature. So it seems possible that it should be considered more akin to a school for that reason. And we're often treated differently from schools. I've been all the past 2 weeks, the past 3 weeks, looking at how incorporated public libraries are not treated the same as schools in the federal government's FEMA response. That strikes some of our librarians and library directors as weird. Like in Vermont, we have these two types, and like, what's up with that? We also have seen with criminal, which we should get to it after we kind of finish with this topic, criminal threatening, Senate 265 from last year. It's the building being municipal that protects municipal staff. So incorporated, every school is protected, municipal or a public school or a nonprofit school or a private school. All schools are protected, but municipal library staff have a protection in that bill that incorporated don't have. We keep getting tossed out of the educational bucket. And that I think is important to remember in this setting. Potentially. Like, to me, we seem more akin to, and like, why would public librarians, I know our service is different from school librarians and academic librarians, but there seem to be laws about how a school library would be covered. And I think that applies to academic as well. Like, I think UVM's got like maybe extra protection. And I'm not an attorney and I'm not parsing, we have to do some degree of discussing what is written in the law to be thinking about what we're doing, which isn't, we haven't been asked to make recommendations to public libraries. We've been asked to make recommendations to the legislature. So we can make recommendations to public libraries, but our specific charge is recommendations to the legislature. And it could be that we don't recommend anything to the legislature on this. It could be that we recommend further discussion, that this is too big of a topic to just have us, we're not deciding the law right now. We're just saying, hey, this is a weird area. And you may not have thought of it because they're not, most of them, librarians. Denise?
No, I think that's a really interesting point. So is one of the questions then that you kind of raised by saying that, do we want to address that in our recommendations? The idea that we are, like, should we fall into a specific bucket? Because we don't. Are we saying that that's a discussion we want to have as part of our recommendations?
I think we might want to have that discussion as part of like the governance in general. I mean, we could have that discussion at any point and then just kind of loop it in on those governance topics. But I think the legislature seems to be, when they're legislating, they seem to be thinking they've cast this broad net. But in the way that they've done all schools, it would be nice for them to do all schools and all public libraries at times, if that's what they mean. I think they don't remember that many of the, maybe a third of the public libraries are incorporated. That's pretty in the weeds for them with their big scopes and what they're working on. And so just recommending to them, when you legislate, if you want it to apply to public libraries, cast this broad net, use this language.
Right. So the idea is if their intention is to include the libraries, they need to understand that that's not necessarily the case at the moment.
Right. And if they want to, like, that we might recommend that when they consider rules for education, that they also consider them, and for school settings, that they also really ponder, are they interested in that for, if there's a public safety matter, that they also really consider it for public libraries, if that's what they're trying to do. Because when they think, what the issue that was brought to the person in House Education, the representative, was specifically about, if somebody open carries, then they come into the children's room, then what? It was specifically, and that was the House Education people were all like, well, yeah, that's a problem. I mean, that was their gut reaction to it. That's a problem. And is it going to be, you can't open carry in the children's room, but we've got one room libraries. The whole thing is the children's room. Like, what is it that triggered that for them? We weren't there in that original conversation, but I do think that that's one of those things, like, sometimes the legislators would be surprised you can do something, and this might be one of those things, because they're not articulating it well. I feel bad saying that, but it hasn't been well articulated in statute, that if that was what they wanted, that, I think they need to be thinking about how to say all public libraries, and when they want to include libraries and educational facilities. That might be a slippery slope. Now you could have rec centers and educational facilities too. And like, I don't know, but like we are very closely aligned with an educational bent in state statute in a way that some other facilities may not be. Jeanette?
Oh, I was just wondering, sometimes legislation can only affect public entities, that they cannot affect private entities. Like some federal legislation only applies to, government employees or government facilities, but cannot be applied to a private business. Maybe, and I don't know, that's the reason they specify public libraries and do not include the 501c3s, that they can't.
They
have no
don't
idea.
actually
Throwing it out.
specify, they don't actually specify in that criminal threatening that it's public libraries. They say municipally owned buildings. So it's covering public libraries in most cases, and it may be covering some incorporated libraries that are in municipal buildings, but they clearly say both, they say schools. So with criminal threatening, it's like all
So-
schools, and there's lots of legislation that says schools.
Right, which would include private schools.
So they do schools, and then in parentheses, I think it's like schools, both private and public. And
Right.
we would,
They
if they
can-
just said libraries, both private and public, it would be similar. I mean,
Exactly.
we're not going to be able to write legislation for them. They're still going to need to write it for themselves, but we could recommend that they add expansive language so that it's covering all of the public libraries equally.
Right.
If that's possible, and they have legislative aides who actually do the writing, and if it's not possible, they might respond to us and say that's not possible. If our group wanted to recommend that. I don't think we should worry, to Kevin's point earlier, I don't think we should worry too much about parsing it. It's really, if we have a recommendation, we could say that they should consider the addition of public libraries to this thing. We could develop specific language for them, but we could just recommend that they consider the addition, which is possibly easier for us. And they may come back and say, Kathy, you have to actually write the words, and then we'll find that out.
Yeah.
But since they haven't given us a template, like, I think we're good. We just recommend consideration of things if we want to on different topics. And right now, the one that we should try to like focus on initially is the gun safety, and then we could look at other things like the criminal threatening. If we wanted to make that recommendation for a cleanup of the language to an existing bill. So I guess maybe I'm not sure how to move forward, because we need to have consensus for the person writing the report. If we're going to include something, it shouldn't just be up to the report writer to say it's this way or it's that way. That puts a lot of burden on them. So I'm wondering, I would love for the working group members, and thank you to Denise who's on screen, to just come on screen and stay on screen if you're in a place where you're comfortable doing that, because it's really hard to gauge. It's like we could do straw polls, but it's hard to gauge how people are feeling. And I know we've heard things on both sides. And I think that, like, if I can share, I think that the people who are saying maybe we shouldn't make any changes here are saying it from a place of inclusion and trying to have that ability to meet the needs of their communities, which is really important. And those are important things to think about. I also want to say, I think it's not just a matter of personal, like, I don't think it's actually relevant necessarily if each of us owns a gun or not, as we share, like, because we're here in our librarian setting and we're thinking about experiences for staff and the public in our spaces. So, you know, I just said it's not necessary to share. I don't own a gun, but my family members do. So, like, it's not that I'm gun averse. Growing up in Vermont, it's hard to be totally gun averse. You can see how they're useful for people, for food and for self-protection. And I think that's our rural state is a different setting than other settings in the country. The thing I worry about is if it's up to each board of trustees, we see how that doesn't work very well to actually protect staff. And to actually protect the public. There are things like when somebody's doing a criminal threatening thing, that's for everybody in that rule, right? And everybody.
Can I make a point?
Yeah, of course.
So if someone is going to use a gun in a threatening or unlawful, against a person, the fact that there's a law saying that they can't take it into the library really isn't going to stop them from doing that. Do you know what I mean? If they're in the mindset that they want to harm someone or that they want to, you know, for example, like a school shooting, you can't bring guns into schools. People who are already at that point, the law doesn't stop them from doing that. All it's stopping is it's stopping people who follow the laws. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm not saying, um, I'm just, I'm trying to be devil's advocate and I'm trying to argue the side of what a fair amount, I think, of Vermonters are going to argue.
No, I hear you. And I have a question maybe. And Kelly, I want to be sure this isn't a personal, like you are doing a good job in what you're doing. And I hear you definitely. And I'm thinking right now about experiences with drugs. So we're talking about guns, but we can talk about other things. And maybe we should move off of guns for a second so that we don't just like keep poking at this. Let's think about guns. I'm sorry, let's think about drugs rather in school property versus drugs in front of a public library. The the usual way that these things are determined is like how do you keep a drug dealer from selling drugs at your school? There are often in states these extra things that are done. I mean, criminal threatening, that S-265 is additive. And there are some who would say it's already in there. You're already not allowed to do this. But because of things that have been happening recently, I think that's why the legislature said, let's add this so that the city clerk, the town clerk they get extra protection. It's that the consequence is more severe. So it's a greater deterrent because we've observed this bad behavior. Now, the same with drugs. You can't sell cocaine on the street, but you really can't sell it in front of a school. So that means that like a drug dealer goes down the street. And we should talk about drugs and like that's a safety issue, right? It's a safety issue for the person using them at the library, but it's also a safety issue for the people who are kind of drawn to the library as a place to exchange things in certain situations. And we might be recommending legislation that's not necessary, and that would be something we should avoid doing. But I think that extra level is why these recommendations come out for educational settings. And in my experience, again, across the country, it's been something where it's like, well, how could it be that you're allowed to do this in front of the public library, but not the school? And if the library is next to a school, you're protected because you're in their zone. But otherwise, like it's a free for all and everybody's like open air dealing on your sidewalk. Like, I don't know that that's happening in Vermont, but I'm just thinking it through. Like, why do we have these different tiers? Denise?
So I think Kelly's totally right in that if somebody wants to commit harm, they're going to do it, regardless of the laws. Totally get it. I guess I keep returning to the dog because it's sort of this, where Vermont, everyone has dogs apparently, right? Not really. But part of the reason I can't bring my dog in is because I know people are fearful of dogs, regardless of whether my dog personally is harmful. And as a person who was afraid of dogs for most of their life, I wouldn't go into a public library, for instance, if somebody had their dog there that was not a safety animal. So I just wonder too, if we allow people to bring their guns in, is that going to deter others from feeling safe and wanting to use our services, whereas the person with the dog or the gun can still use our services? We're not denying them that. We're just asking them not to bring those items with them so that others can feel a level of comfort to use us as well. I don't anticipate that the person bringing the dog or the gun is a dangerous person, but I'm trying to think about the rest of us who may have a fear. And again, you could be fearful of anything, right? So you could expand that to a whole lot of other things that maybe are irrational or not irrational, but that, is not common. But I guess I just wanted to point that out.
Wondering if there are folks who we haven't heard from who are here. Maria, not to put you super on the spot, but
No, I was just raising my hand anyway. This is a topic that I feel very personally passionate about, I will say, and I will try to, but that I'm also in this setting not as expert in maybe as some others. But I want to say that I greatly agree with what Denise just shared. And thank everyone for sharing their opinions and personal experiences with this. I've been very lucky not to have been in a library with an active safety incident occurring. But I also want to know, I am not sure who I heard it from, but I did hear a comment or a mention of an inclusion in this conversation. And that I'm super hesitant to use that term in this conversation because so often, and no one has made this argument here in this space, but so often we hear in this country that other argument that folks are being exclusionary and that it becomes an inclusion or access issue for people because they can't bring their guns into whatever space. And in my opinion, that is completely undermining and flipping the idea of true inclusion on its head in a really scary and really dangerous way. Because just as Denise was saying, we're not saying that you can't come into a space and not use a space and research about guns all you want in our, using our resources. But that doesn't mean that you have to bring your gun into this space. Just like you can come in and research dogs all you want. It doesn't mean you can just bring your dog into a space. We're not talking about and I think the same goes for all weapons or most safety issues, drugs included. This isn't a personal identity that we're excluding. I probably just opened up a lot of can of worms actually just saying that, but there you can remove I think you can remove this piece of yourself for a time while you're using the library. So I yeah, I'll end it there before I get myself in big trouble.
Thanks, Maria. Kelly?
I don't think I use the word inclusion. I think what I said was people might have felt intentionally excluded or felt like that they were being made to feel that they were not welcome there. So I don't think I necessarily use that word. And it's not, it's more that the fire's already been started and I don't want us to fan the flames, basically, is what I was getting at. So.
Thank you, Kelly, for restating your what you were sharing. I do think there's something of interest in this for me, in the fact that so far it's kind of hearsay that somebody said this to the legislator. Now, I think that the legislator is a reliable source of information. And I do know who he said it in terms of like what library and what position, and I won't share that today. But that person didn't submit testimony. Nobody submitted testimony. Testimony didn't have to be I had a gun brandished at me, or I was pushed, or somebody spat on me, or somebody, oh my God, swung a. I mean, the things that can be threatening in a library setting, let me tell you, a giant walking stick, a skateboard, a longboard, like all kinds of things I've had swung at my head. We're not banning those. at a state level. The fact of the matter is nobody showed up to say this thing has happened in our library and there's a problem. And as the state library staff, the Department of Library staff, we have certainly heard people's worries and concern and heard stories of things that are distressing, right? But it's also the case that even in a general way, people didn't provide that testimony. And so then there becomes a question of Vermont has been an open carry state for this whole time. And are we recommending over legislating? And there's like, what's the real, what there is there, right? I don't know if that's how to say it, but like, how real is this actual versus the fear? And then as working group members, if God forbid, I'm knocking on wood right now, God forbid something happened, an act of violence in a library with a firearm, would everybody look back at us and say, well, you did nothing to recommend any changes to the legislature? Those are the things I think we're balancing, right? It's hard. Like I'm not sure where to go from that spot. Like, should we be proactively protecting based on worries and where things are going? Or where they look like they're going, because guns in public and threatening of people does, maybe it's on the rise, like that's certainly being reported. But in Vermont libraries, have we actually heard this concern as like a thing that happened? Not just, I was worried because a person was doing exactly what they do on the sidewalk of their grocery store, but their gun and the way they were acting made me feel bleh, and I didn't. And I reported it, and this is like, I have not heard the story of this personally. And I'm watching the consultant chat to see if somebody's piping up right now to say, Kathy, we hear this all the time. And I'm not seeing even typing happening right now. So I think it's hard to watch the consultant chat, so hang on. But Kelly and Karen both have their hands up. So I think Kelly, was yours an old hand? Yes, so Karen and then Denise.
So I was just going to say that I hear the concern about over legislating or making rules about something that hasn't happened yet or that may never happen. I can think of lots of cases though where we make rules or laws or policies to prevent things that we think are likely to happen, even though they haven't happened yet. And I would say that despite the risk for over legislating, I would feel better about having more rules that it turns out maybe we don't need versus waiting for an incident to happen and then after the fact saying like, boy, I wish we'd had a rule. Now, you could also make the case that like people who intend to do harm don't follow rules anyway, so rules don't make a difference. But I do think having something on the books, like legislation, that says this is officially not okay, and we've drawn a line, does make a statement. And I think it's important to do things that are active, that could actively change the likelihood of this happening. But I think legislation, even though it's a little bit more passive maybe than we'd might like, does make a statement that is important to make.
Thank you. Denise?
So I was just noting, you were saying like, somebody could pick up a stapler and, throw it at your head and all that. But I think for me, the difference is all of those objects have actual other uses. There is no other use for a gun than to hurt, maim, or kill. And I understand that that could be used on, for hunting, and I know it can be used in protection, although the limited research we have indicates that, protection isn't really happening with guns right now. So the idea that you can ban this in other places, like you were saying, Karen, like schools, I'd rather be proactive. Because again, there's no other use for that particular item than harm. And again, I'm not saying that you have it and you're going to harm someone, but I think that kind of distinguishes it from those other examples we were just kind of pointing to.
Thanks, Denise. Jeanette?
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
I'm sorry, I'm mumbling. Yes, Jeanette?
Again, this is coming from a position of I have no idea, but if there is no law on the book saying you can't bring guns into a library, then if somebody brings their gun into a library, and although they haven't actually fired it, but you feel threatened, would the police even come if your complaint was someone has a gun in the library? Or if they're not breaking a law, then the police probably aren't going to drive over a mountain to come intervene.
I think then it comes down to that, how do you articulate to law enforcement that you're threatened and what is the reason for threatening? If somebody brings in a skateboard, but they're not brandishing it to hurt you, then your personal worries about a skateboard from past activities might be not something they'd respond to. They might ask, are they using it in X, Y, or Z way? I think the gun would be similar. If somebody's open carrying and they're just browsing the new nonfiction, like right now, who cares, right? Like you being worried about it, they're not going to come.
But an argument, which we hopefully aren't going to have, but if someone has a difference of opinion over an overdue library book, it's one thing if they're holding a firearm versus if they're not. I mean, I've been threatened, with I'm going to go home and get my gun over an overdue library book.
So see, I don't want to poke at your personal trauma stuff, and yet you just said something relevant, very relevant to this conversation, because I was like, I haven't heard about this, but one of our members has been threatened with a not present firearm over an overdue book.
As crazy as it seems.
So it's not an idle wonder if this could ever happen. This is actually a thing that has happened. And if we're hearing one person in this one setting, possibly this has happened more.
People can get very volatile over the smallest issue. And, if a firearm is at their side versus if it's not, can make all the difference in the world.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Jeanette. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. So, Karen.
I would also just share that the interaction that I have with in a school, I don't have parents carrying guns when they're with me, but some interactions I've had with parents where they have been very threatening, that would have been a very different discussion had they also had a gun present. And the things that people say when they are feeling passionate and scared and upset, I think just become so much more dangerous when there's also a gun at ready hand. So I'm sure all of us have had uncomfortable, threatening conversations with patrons that could have been different had there been also a gun there.
I think part of what's difficult is if we were saying you need to wear shoes or you can't bring a dog. There's nothing there's nothing in our constitution, like this is a fraught topic for that reason, right? I mean, kids go to the grocery store, kids go to the pool, if your town's lucky enough to have a pool. Kids go to different places. They don't go to those places necessarily in an educational capacity in the same way that they might be brought by their school to the public library. Or they might be going to the public library to get books that we know aren't necessarily available in some of the underfunded school libraries in the state. It really seems to be mainly around to me, I feel like it's around the educational setting. And that's what's different. I'm not positive, but that's where I'm sensing it. Like that's the location of like how is the library different, the public library different from the school and the academic libraries? And it feels like it's because of this thing where kids come here to do their work and to educate themselves, and adults do too. And so treat it like an educational facility rather than like the grocery store or the sidewalk. But yeah, if you're in a community where everybody's walking around with a gun, and then that's the community you serve, Kelly's point that they may not feel welcome, but the community you serve may not feel welcome is a really important point.
This is now getting like far afield, but I would just share that I just attended an event in Texas not that long ago, and Texas has special laws about gun access. So as an event, you can say you can't bring your gun here, but you also have to provide a facility for someone to store their gun. So at the sort of like security checkpoints to get into the event, there is a facility, like little gun safe locker things that are attended by security personnel. That is far beyond, I think, what we want to do, but I don't know. It's like a halfway of like, you can't bring your gun here, but we know you're carrying a gun, so here's a place to store your gun where no one else will take it, like not your car or something like that.
Well, that's the skateboard thing that I worked in San Francisco for so long. You couldn't bring a skateboard in, and there's no bike lock outside. And the skateboard rule was really about damage to the facility inside, but also about how many were swung at us. And so we would take them at the circulation desk and set them aside for the patron. And I do have a friend who was working at a pool in San Francisco where somebody brought their gun and gave it to them at the desk of the pool, which was like, what do I do now? Like, what? Jeanette?
Okay, this is just a chuckle, I think, not pertaining to the discussion, but if you go to an NRA conference, you're not allowed to bring a gun.
Oh my gosh, guess what? It's 10:36. We've been talking and talking. Do we want to take a 15-minute break and kind of think with ourselves and think about coming back? And I mean, we still will have about 40 minutes of time to continue our working group discussion. I think we should continue discussing and then move to report writing at 11:30. Does that sound like a reasonable thing to do right now? So we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to come back at 10:50. And let's try to think about framing it in terms of when we come back, thinking about what recommendations might we make at this point. We've had a lot of discussion so far that's been really great. And I really appreciate everybody sharing their perspectives and playing the devil's advocates and, kind of thinking about this as how will Vermonters react to this and how do we best serve our state? How do we best serve the people of our state? And then, so I also want to remind people that it seems possible to have a working group recommendation that certain individuals don't sign. And I've mentioned that in terms of myself in my state librarian role, that there might be certain portions I can't. It's just not appropriate for me to sign on to. So it's possible that if we have a majority who think that there's a thing, we could have certain abstainers from a recommendation. And it's also possible to say this is something the legislature should consider and actually get more word out about and like actually, get more people on more sides of the fences for the discussion. Let's have it just be civil and not fancy. More voices into the discussion. We don't necessarily need to tell them again, this is the recommendation, just you may wish to consider this. Okay, let's break till actually now I talked too long. Let's break till 10:55, okay? All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's 10:55. Thanks for coming on screen. That helps me to know if there are enough of us back to keep discussing. Oh, there's Maria. Okay, let's get started after our break. We are picking up our working group discussion of safety in libraries. And we're hoping to discuss this for about half an hour at most, and then move to the report writing topic. So I want to open it up to working group members. Actually, let me just check to be sure that nobody else is here, because we had said that if we had members of the public, we would give them the chance to speak at appropriate intervals, and I don't see anybody right now. Okay, so let's go back to our conversation, and I had mentioned the possibility that we try to develop some kind of recommendations for this. So I wanted to check in. Did anybody have thoughts on that or anything else while we were breaking? Susan.
Yeah, I guess I just want to say that we've already established that we are not the professionals here. We don't have experts or professionals here. I will be really uncomfortable with us making recommendations. Making a recommendation that this is something that should be considered, I would be comfortable with. That's that's very squishy language there. But those of us that happen to be in the room right now are not the experts to be making recommendations on this really important and really thorny and very very Vermont diverse topic, I would say.
Thanks, Susan. Karen?
Well, I would offer that although we are not gun experts or lawyers, that we are the people who are, as librarians as a group, are the people who are most likely to be affected were there to be some gun violence issue in our libraries. So I think I would recommend that we make the recommendation that libraries be considered to be included in the legislation that already exists that protects schools, hospitals, and courthouses.
Thanks, Karen. I had during the break written down maybe a potential recommendation. I think it's possibly more in the lines of what Susan shared, but also talks about. Let me just read it. I was thinking about a possible recommendation to the legislature that they look at public safety laws that apply to educational facilities, including gun laws, drug laws, and criminal threatening laws, and consider if they think it would be appropriate to apply those same protections to public libraries in the state, both municipal and incorporated. I guess that could be expanded to all libraries in the state, but the others are already covered. I'm going to put that language in the chat. Maybe that feels comfortable to people to try to get them looking at each of those areas. And there may be other areas that we could call out. And really looking at, we're not proposing new language. It's just, do you add libraries into the list of where this applies? And that makes the conversation happen later. So then if the public library and gun topic, if they decide to pick that up, then people would know about it from watching the legislative calendar and be able to speak to it, offer written testimony and speak to the legislature directly, and potentially they would have experts in that field And we know there's not really an expert in the field that I'm aware of. There's not a gun safety library expert. I don't think. Maybe someone knows of it. Them. And it could also be that they look at public safety laws that already apply, and when they're moving forward, so maybe look at public safety laws that already apply. Also recommend that they consider public libraries when enacting future public safety legislation relevant to public buildings and schools. Public buildings and or schools. Because it could be just for public buildings and it could just be for schools, but something's happened with public buildings with criminal threatening where I think they think you're protected in an incorporated public library. I think the legislatures just think it's a public library. Of course, it's a municipal building. So this is just a suggestion. But there may be other suggestions, so.
I think it's a good one.
Yeah, and it also
Susan's
is, it's broader now. It actually, touches upon more subjects, which would be appropriate.
Should we feel weird taking a vote on a recommendation? It's not a formal vote, I guess, but like just, I think for the writer of this section, I think it would be helpful if we could kind of just in the chat, why don't we just put our hands up for like a straw poll kind of vote? So department staff, don't raise your hand. You're not the working group, but just the working group members use the little hand raise function if you have it. If you think this recommendation could come from the working group in our report. Okay. And we do have folks who are not present. So I think when writing the report, if this recommendation in this type of language could be included, that would be helpful. It looks like pretty much like maybe, is there anybody in the working group today who's here who didn't? No, we all think this sounds good. So the people who aren't here today may have other ideas, and we'll talk about the recommendations one by one later. So I think we seem to have, like Vermonters do, we seem to have come to some sort of, in the best spirit of our state, we've talked about it, we've had different perspectives shared, and we've come to something that our team feels comfortable with, which is, I feel kind of relieved. That's great. Good job. Go working group. Jeanette? Oh, we can't hear you.
That wasn't me.
Oh. She wasn't raising on purpose. Okay. Well, are there other things we should talk about in this area? What about the idea of talking about, oh, I had some notes. Hold on. Hold on. So we've talked a lot about a possible recommendation to the legislature, but we also have, I don't think anybody's going to legislate this, but I think with regards to safety and staffing, Joy raised some topics about working alone, the idea of having a volunteer nearby. I went to, gosh, I'm trying to remember what library it was. It was a new library facility that had sheep attacking its backyard from the neighbor whose fence kept coming down. And where the heck was I? I was in Addison. Ferrisburg, Moncton, yes. And the librarian there had been a school librarian and a she had been a school librarian for years, was retired and was a public librarian. And she was saying that when she started at that this was last summer, she was sharing when she started at that library, they were having trouble expanding hours because of the staffing and the fact that they really they like to have a volunteer, like a trustee or a volunteer present with them. I recall, and Joy was speaking to that today, like, even if there's not two paid staff members, can you get a second human in the building? So something about staffing and open hours, a recommendation that it's safest if there are multiple people present, and that could be a combination of staff and volunteers working together. Seems like something that might be helpful to provide some guidance for trustees. And then also looking at when is stuff going on in your town center or nearby businesses. Like if you're in Albany, I was just in Albany, visiting them spontaneously the other day, and they've got a general store right nearby, and like, being open at the same time might make sense there because it's just this one little library at the back of a public building, and like, who's there? Just trying to think about the little rural one human branches, and not branches, one human libraries. Do you think we should put something into our staffing recommendations potentially, or like hold this space for staffing? Because we haven't seen we didn't ask that question specifically, actually, in the staffing survey. Susan?
Would we be making that recommendation to the legislature or to trustees?
I think that would just be like, this is important. Like when we do our staffing report, we could say that this is an area of concern related to safety. It's like the intersection of safety and staffing. And we recommend staff not work alone, and that either multiple staff or staff and trustees work together. I mean, not every recommendation has to be just to the legislature, I guess.
I think that, again, is really unique to each individual library. And even having volunteers having to double up could be too much of a burden on some. I think of Albany, and they're pleased if 3 people come in a day. Having 2 people having to sit there during all of their open hours on the chance that someone will come in that day, I think it's not a one size fits all solution for our big to small libraries.
Well, it's not. I'm wondering, and that's a good point, because they seemed startled that I came in, not just that they seemed to not care too much that I was a state librarian, and just that I was like, someone came in. It was really exciting for them to have just a visitor. But like if they weren't open at the same time as the Jenny, that might be problematic. It could be consider having multiple people present and or being open at times when other agencies or other businesses are open. I don't know.
I'm trying to think if this is covered already in information like in the trustees manual. I feel like perhaps the information that the training that trustees get from the Department of Libraries might be an appropriate place for this to happen, but for this statewide group to make a recommendation about what should happen might be overkill on it.
That could be. I'm seeing a couple nods. It doesn't rise to the level of this working group to make a recommendation on this topic. Okay. And then I got another note. I just don't want to skip any notes before we move to the next thing.
Can I add one more thing about that?
Yeah.
Just to sort of expand on that idea, there are still plenty of libraries that have hours that are staffed only by volunteers. One single volunteer that isn't a staff member, doesn't necessarily have the training. Again, I don't think we're in a position to say you should or should not do that. But in that same category of things that trustees should be aware of in terms of safety, that's right up there, I would say, and something that maybe we don't even realize is happening still in libraries.
Well, I've got to say, I did have a conversation with a trustee recently with regards to, so there's the intersection of staffing and library and safety, and then there's the intersection of programming and safety. And in a conversation recently about programming and safety, I had a strange moment where I was saying it's the role of the trustees to ensure the staff are safe in a public library setting. And I know that's something that must be covered in our trainings. And I know that this seemed like news to them. And the idea that if they wanted to do a special program and they didn't have money to pay extra staff or security and the program might bring in people, yeah, that would be the trustees who could step up and be there with the community. That was like, what? Like, what are you talking about, crazy state librarian? There was a complete disconnect from what I would have expected. And sort of, well, I already volunteer a lot. I do XYZ. That's a different thing. And that to me would be sort of standard and normal. And that's what we hear about from some folks that their trustees do. And so even like whose job it is to ensure safety, I mean, it's not something in statute, but like, I think, the department's not necessarily the arbiter of anything, right? Like we can tell them as a trustee, it's your role to ensure staff safety because they're the employer, just like any employer. And it seems like they shouldn't need, this is already there's already employment law. Maybe we're just saying the obvious.
But sometimes the obvious needs to be said to trustees.
Yeah. And the department saying it is kind of like, well, that's neither here nor there. But if they saw something like that in the report, and maybe it's not a recommendation, it's just something written in the report. The trustees and sometimes the municipality doesn't really think about the library at all. And it's just, you're over there and you're doing your thing. I heard of a library in Vermont that it's not a municipal library, but the town municipal office is closed and nobody thought to tell the incorporated library. And so flooding was going on and the staff were still at work. And that's a safety issue. Any of the public who were at the library didn't know to go home. The staff didn't know the roads were closing because they're not sitting on the internet, they're providing public service. So I think like there is a potential, even like a public safety outside the building gap. Do we make it explicit in the working group report that these are concerns? I'm not sure. Do we just mention it in the summary? Denise?
So I think it's a good idea to make it a statement of concern. I guess the question is, what's the ask? Or is there an ask? Are we just, like, what would we expect the legislature to do? Or who's going to read this and understand that it applies to them as a trustee? Because it seems really important, actually. I don't know how we reach out to get the attention of trustees who aren't necessarily going to read this or.
Well, we do training in the department, and I think, from Joy's presentation, the training already includes, it's best not to have staff work solo.
Mhm.
That's the department's guidance from a safety perspective. Yeah, I mean, there's always the question, we're going to write like a 200-page report and who's going to actually read the darn thing? It's probably not going to make the executive summary. But we could point to it and somebody could point to it with their trustees if they had a concern. Or we could share it with the League of Cities and Towns and say this is this working group was asked to think about COVID. And there's a safety element there, right? We were asked, and we haven't talked about that at all yet, now that I'm realizing it. There's a public safety and staff safety aspect related to COVID that we could bring in, and then also related to the flood. Like, it's important for municipalities to consider this type of thing when communicating. Like, if the library is open, somebody needs to share public safety messages with library staff. No. And that could be public safety messages for a global pandemic or for a flood, or, road closures, things that will impact the staff. That, developing the good communications between the municipal or the incorporated public library and the municipalities keys, so that people know who's in those buildings and who's impacted. And it, just like they might go business to business, somebody might skip the library. Karen?
I was just going to say, it feels like that particular recommendation. So the public safety aspect of, something big is happening in town, and everyone should know and maybe return to their homes or whatever, for flooding or whatever. It seems like putting that into the trustees training or the trustees handbook, and getting at it from that angle, but also reaching out to the League of Cities and Towns and having that be something that they talk with municipalities about. Like, think about the people in your town who might not be municipal employees, but would need to be informed if there was some big thing happening. Like, our whole town locked down because there was some big whatever that is. Who else would need to be informed? And then try to get at it from both ends, so that if the trustees didn't take some action on it, then the municipality is also thinking about it, and maybe, between the two of them, someone will step up and say, like, oh, we should make a plan for this.
So it may not be a recommendation in the working group report, but it is something that could be mentioned in the body of the summary. Does that sound agreeable to folks? So we try to incorporate something about that in our emergency response section, or the safety and libraries section. Actually might be more appropriate for the emergency response section. Okay. We talked about rural libraries and little settings. We didn't talk as much about urban libraries, but we've talked about kind of general public safety. I wonder, are there any topics we haven't touched on related to safety in libraries that are of concern and that working group members want to raise before we move to our next topic? Crickets. So let's move to report writing, and I'm actually gonna share my screen because I made a little PowerPoint. Here we go. Now for something completely the same, PowerPoints. Okay. Slideshow. What now? No, thank you. I just want to do from the beginning. Okay, do you see it? Oh, this is not working right. I'm just going to run it this way. I'll make this smaller. Okay. I just wanted to share an update on where we are. So far, we've received 6 summary reports, I think. Stuff has been coming in during the past week and a half, 2 weeks, and I'm possibly falling behind on it. So I just want to call out and appreciate those who have gotten their reports to me already. Continuing education report by Wendy Sharkey, emergency preparedness. I want to say Wendy was way early. She's like total boss of reports. Emergency preparedness, Kelly McCagg, facilities, Denise Hersey, social services, Andy Kolovos, even though he's on sabbatical, staffing, Maria Avery, and technology, Karen McCullough. Does anybody remember sending me a report that's report isn't listed here? Okay, then I probably got them all. And I want to say before I click on the next slide, it's okay. There's no shame in the next slide. I'm on the next slide. Here we go. 5 draft summary reports are outstanding. So Jeanette, Bear, Collections, Inclusive Services, Meg, Allison. Christopher had asked for more time since he was scheduled to be on sabbatical for his intellectual freedom. Library Structures and Organizations. Susan O'Connell had also let me know she needed more time. Programming, I feel like running the committee meetings, I shouldn't have, or the working group meetings, I shouldn't have signed up for programming, but I did, and so it's late. So that's kind of where we are now. And you'll see, like, we're about at half and half. So right now, I think the report is still due on November 1st, 2023. You'll remember that I mentioned that I testified to both the House and Senate committees on education, on Senate Bill 133, which is a miscellaneous educational bill, which would have amended our report due date officially. My impression is that report has, that miscellaneous education bill was approved by both the Senate and the House, but that Governor Scott has not yet signed it. I don't know if he will sign it. I know he's not signed anything since the end of June, and the flooding that happened is probably taking up most of his time. In those conversations I had, the House and Senate committees on education almost started laughing at how what kind of good doobies we are, and how like we really thought that they were serious with their date. And they're like, you can always submit things late, but you know, it would be good to have it by December 20th, 2023, so that we can do things in the same legislative session. I think they'd be okay with us getting it to them by December 20th, 2023, even if they don't sign that bill. And that's the same bill that incorporated safety. On this slide, I just want to acknowledge we have some challenges. So you all have your regular work, you all have your regular things in your life going on. This is a really extensive charge that we have, and it's hard to do everything you're supposed to do, plus emergencies that crop up, and get this done. I also want to note that the department's capacity to support the working group has been stretched. I've been so busy scheduling the next meetings that I haven't had time to even read things most of the time. And some of you have sent me things and then asked for feedback, and I just have to be honest with you, I haven't read them yet, and I feel badly about that. And the department's trying to launch the capital grant programs, and we haven't yet been able to hire somebody to manage that work. And I'm getting very worried about my capacity to be the person who pulls it all together somehow. And then you throw on top of that the July storms impact to members, libraries, homes, and communities, which is just kind of heavy. And so I have a recommended solution. And I think I spelled recommended incorrectly. There we go. I'll save it. I would like to recommend that any funds not spent from our $12,000 appropriation after we pay the staffing and salary survey consultant be allocated toward a report writer. The department has some other funds. I had not wanted to use department funds on this report, but really I said I would do the report writing. I don't seem to have capacity. Nobody in our team seems to have capacity. So I think this is like, to get our work done, we need some extreme measures right now. And that we could support the working group in this way and itemize the costs of the working group to the legislature, so they understand next time that they want a working group on something in the land of libraries, like there's a cost to it. You don't just tell us the per diems are covered. That we build that into what we ask for in the future if they think of working groups. So the idea would be that the department would put out a simplified bid. We would do it very, very quickly and use a combination of leftover money and the working group's allocation or appropriation plus department funds, and have a report that's cohesive and ties together the department reports and the subject reports that each of you has written. It doesn't get any of us out of the task of writing the subject reports, but it does pull them together, create a cohesive voice. And the final report would include summaries on each topic of each topic that the working group was charged with studying, and include an executive summary. And we would still be responsible for developing recommendations and making those decisions. It's not offloading our responsibility of coming to some group consensus. So the deliverables would kind of be twofold. One would be a working group report with an introduction, the many subject reports, and a conclusion. And then there would also be a high-level overview, an executive summary of 5 to 10 pages in length that highlights the themes that emerged across multiple topics and the key recommendations to the legislature. Early guesses are that this might cost about $5,000, and I'd like I'm bringing it to you so that the working group could approve the use of any funds that remain after we pay for the staffing and salary survey. And now we do discussion. I don't know why I'm singing. Okay, Karen, I'm getting loopy. Kelly.
Can I make a motion to use funds up to $5,000 to hire a report writer? And to take a lot of work off of everyone's plate?
Yeah. Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Yes.
Jeanette seconds. Do we want to discuss? I'll open it up for discussion. Jeanette?
I guess my only question is on the timeline. Will you be able to find, hire, and and get your work product within the timeline that you have?
I think so. I've talked, it's going to be a challenge, but I think we're ready to kind of move forward right away after today with the simplified bid process. And we've done a little bit of work in the department. Thank you, Jeanette, for reaching out to colleagues at some other folks, at some other agencies, rather, organizations like Vermont Humanities, to see who they've used. We need a simplified bid process, doesn't have this whole waiting and waiting and waiting for the full bid process to unfold. It's really that you need at least 3 possible vendors and you share the proposal with them, and it's kind of it's an accelerated timeline. But yeah, it's getting tight. It feels tight, and I wish I had done this earlier, but I think it took the flood for me to realize how. I think that the involvement of the department and Storm trying to like help libraries recover and try to do some fundraising and have those conversations and visit the libraries, and just everything's sort of snowballing because we also thought we had that we would be able to fill our positions for the capital grants more quickly. So the fact that our recruitment has the first phase of it, the recruitment wasn't successful and we have to relaunch that. So we're a little behind on that project, which is impacting this one. But I think we'll be okay, or at least we could get further along. I mean, I'm hopeful that we can still deliver by December 20th.
Okay, well, do you need a vote?
If there's no other discussion, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? In that case, we'll move forward. I don't think we'll use the full 5,000. I think it's more likely to be 3,000 because we're not likely to have that much left from the staffing and salaries survey. I do also want to ask for help from you all. The staffing and salary survey, if it's important to you as working group members, which I think it is, particularly those of you who have public library contacts, please boost the message about it. It's awkward for the department to boost the message about it. So like I've seen on the listservs that we've got people talking about like how much they pay a substitute. That's a great entryway for one of you public library people to be like, hey, don't forget, public library directors, do your survey. Because so far we've only had about 10 responses to the survey. And that's normal. People wait till the 11th hour on every survey we put out. But and they do need to gather information first, but I ask public library folks to please boost that message in any way you can.
I'm putting it in the newsletter for VLA, so.
Awesome. Thank you. And then there is also this thing going on where like the consultant had said, well, if we don't reach everybody, we might need help like doing individual calls. And I'll try to I would like to engage working group members in that effort, given everything else that's going on in the department and the fact that we just called, oh my God, how many libraries? We've been doing a lot of direct calls. It would be good for the working group to make the calls and everybody pitching in on that to the public libraries that haven't responded, so that the department's not just calling and calling and calling. Because I want to ask Josh, how many libraries have now responded to the storm damage surveys?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we're down to single digits or very close to single digits.
12. We're down. I saw your message from this morning. Oh no, that was yesterday. Darn it.
Today is, sorry, I'm missing it. It was, we're down to 7.
Which is amazing. We've never done this kind of, I'm getting to the point where I'm just going to like drive to those last 7 and look in the windows, because some of them are open like 3 hours a week. I mean, actually we had one 2 hours a week. Jeanette.
I was just wondering when the salary survey went out and how.
It went direct to the directors because they're the ones who will fill it out, and it went from the consultants to the directors by email.
Okay, and we're sure they were received. I mean, things that go out in batches frequently end up in spam.
Well, I
got mine.
Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten one. I have a copy of what was sent, but I know we've had some people respond to them, and we've announced it in our departmental newsletter, and we're trying to get the word out about it. But, I can't ensure that everybody read every email or that it didn't land in somebody's spam, unfortunately. Susan?
I just didn't know if there was a follow-up via, US mail.
No, there will not be. I don't believe there will be a follow-up by US mail, but there would be like 4 engagements, and that includes phone calls and emails.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Susan?
I don't think I got an email. I knew that there was a meeting about it, that a webinar that I was going to go to, and then there was a flood and life fell apart. And that's kind of where it ended with me. And I thought my next step was, I gotta find that recording of the webinar, figure out how to do this thing. But I don't remember like getting an email. And it is possible that I missed it. I've been looking for it, but also life was pretty crazy. So all of that to say, whether it was successful in getting to everyone or not, it might not be unreasonable to resend it, not as because of the special circumstances. Just something to consider.
The department didn't send it out, and we've contracted with a consultant so we can share that information with them, but it wouldn't have come from us. And I'm asking Jeanette.
Chase sent it out.
What's
Stephanie
that?
Chase. Stephanie Chase sent it out.
So it would have come from Stephanie?
Yeah, if you search Stephanie Chase, it should pop up in your thing.
Okay, I'll look for it.
Okay.
And I share that not so much as somebody helped me with it, but I think I usually pay attention to this stuff and it's totally off my radar. So that might be an indication.
Yeah, Susan, if you could check your inbox and spam, and if you don't find it, then please, if you could email me and Jeanette, that would be awesome, because then we can follow up with them and say, we have at least one with it library director who would have answered this if they had seen it, who didn't see it, and we can ask them to resend everything. You're a with it library director, because they might be like, oh, it went to their spam. And like, I think you would know to check the spam, right?
Actually, I'm here to say I'm not a with it library director. I did just check my email and I got it on July 19th. So,
Okay.
I'm officially a not with it library director.
You're a usually with it library director who has had a
Welcome to the club,
significant
Susan.
flood at your building, Susan.
All right, sorry about that. I thought I
Sorry,
had
Kelly, I
important information to
overtalked
share
you.
there.
Kelly, I'm
I just
sorry.
said welcome to the club, Susan. That's all I said.
I'm a usually with it state librarian who's been like, because I live in Montpelier and was really afraid that like the dam was going to release, and I was already seeing water on my street, and I was just like, ah. And then Tom McMurdo saved me. I went across the pedestrian bridge with my cat and Tom saved me. It was kind of scary. Anyway, that's not the same as like actually having my home flood or having something terrible, but just to say, I think all of us in all of our different phases are dealing with some extra stuff right now. And so I appreciate that everybody's got patience and is being gentle with themselves. And thank you. And thanks for approving that use of the money so that we can potentially get some help, because nothing is more important than calling for help when you need it. I'm seeing Joy is doing something. There's something in the chat. Oh, Kelly, there is no after lunch. I think we're actually potentially about to adjourn. So I don't know if Kelly's still here. Did she leave? No, she's still there. Put it in the chat. There is no, she heard it. Okay. So is there anything else anybody wants to share on report writing? It would be great for those of you who haven't yet gotten your reports in, including me, to aim to get them in the next 2 weeks, because I think then we'll have the whole package of things to give to the consultant at the same time. I haven't posted draft reports on the website, but if somebody, Jeanette might like I'm remembering now some long ago email that some folks might like an example report or like see what somebody else did. Somebody could send Jeanette their sample or volunteer for me to send Jeanette their sample if you feel pretty okay about it, or to send other folks. Susan, do you want a sample too?
Yes, please.
Jeanette, so hold on a second. I think the Jeanettes are getting confused. I think it's Jeanette Bear who asked for a sample and Susan who asked for a sample, but I think Jeanette Schaefer might also like a sample because she'll be helping with the bid, the simplified bid. So who thinks theirs is like good enough to look at? Like, I don't want to overshare, but like, you feel pretty good about it. Let me look at who has.
It seems like it's maybe a moot point since half the people have actually submitted them, but I feel like part of my hang up was it seems like they should have the same sort of structure. And I wanted someone to tell me what that structure was. I know there wasn't a person whose job it was to tell me that structure, but
yeah. My sense of the structure was that like you were just going to kind of summarize the key elements from testimony that you heard, and then summarize some recommendations from the discussion, and also provide summary of the non-departmental expert testimony. So for some of you, that's more extensive than others of you, I recognize. So maybe the summaries of the testimony at the top, and then the expert testimony, and then the summaries of the community testimony, and then the recommendations, kind of like in 3 parts. Maria?
I don't know how wonderful mine is or how confident I really feel about it, but if it's helpful for it to be shared just to see something else for other people, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay, thank you. we'll pass it along. Okay. Are there any other things we should talk about or questions folks have before we adjourn? Our shortest meeting ever since I've become the chair. And also our most engaged. Without all of the other people, we did really well. Oh, I have a question. Okay, hang on. Before we leave, let me pull this up for a second. Our working group webpage. Okay, I had asked this and then I hadn't yet made the change, but I want to be sure everybody is, oh no, we did make the change. Or no, we're flipping. I haven't made the change. Next meeting, we talked about having the special meeting with the survey consultant, but based on the fact that the storm happened like right when we were supposed to do the original webinar, we moved everything and that bumped everything for the consultants. So I think I had emailed about this, the idea of doing final recommendations and report writing aspects in August and doing the special meeting with the staffing consultants in September. So I just want to be sure, working group members, you're still down for that. And I'd also kind of like to meet in person for that special meeting, because I think it's easier to like get our heads around things and build consensus and be present and see each other and things like that in person. And I'm wondering, are people open to that, doing a special meeting on August 25th in person to work on the recommendations and sort of what we've heard and what we think as a group and sort of gel things as we did today with like really good engaged discourse, and where that might be, where might be a good place to do it. We're happy to host it here in Barrie at the departments. I think we have space that's available here, a large meeting room. But I know that there are people coming from all over and maybe we're central, but maybe we're not. Karen?
So this doesn't affect the whole group necessarily, but just for your knowledge, it is the first week of in-service for most schools. So I know for me, that's an in-service day. I had already reached out to my building administration to see if I could be excused from the in-service day to participate in the meeting. And I don't know yet whether that's true. It is generally difficult to get out of in-service days. They really like to have people all there because there's a lot of sort of like mandatory training that happens then. So it's possible that neither Meg nor I would be able to come. I don't know what her schedule is like, but it's generally that week of August.
Well, something to think about is this is a special meeting, so it could be at a special time. And if people are available the prior Friday, we could potentially do an in-person meeting on the 18th instead of the 25th. So that the school librarians could participate. My calendar looks strangely open on that day. I would have to move nothing, and I don't know why that would be, but that's how it is right now. And I'll hold it.
Sounds like a good idea to move it up to the 18th because we don't want to miss the school librarians.
And what do you all think about coming, assuming we can get the space here at the department at 60 Washington Street in Barrie? What do you think of that? Does it feel sort of central? There's nothing to meet at in Montpelier, by the way, in case anybody wanted to meet there. We're really lucky that we are here. Really fortunate. Okay, so I'm
sorry, it's Karen. Just saying that the 18th is potentially doable for me.
Okay.
I have something very early in the morning here in Rutland, but then the rest of the day is pretty flexible. And it is not an in-service day.
Okay. Okay, and Denise is saying she'll see if she can rearrange things that day.
Well, and maybe we could have a little later start time to accommodate Karen.
Yeah, and also people's travel. What about if we started at 10 to 4?
Sounds good.
Okay, and we'll do a lunch and we'll figure that out. Okay. All right, so our next meeting is a special meeting. We are changing the date to Friday, the 18th. And it will be here in Barry as long as I can get the space, which Gina, I'll need your help reaching out to Daphne about that right away. And if anything doesn't work from that, this is about agenda and meetings, and I can email the group and do polls and stuff. We don't have to meet to decide on meetings. And magically, it is now 11:45. So we're even gonna end 15 minutes early. I'm
Good
gonna
work,
move to
Kathy.
adjournment. Everybody agree that we can adjourn? Do we have a motion to, do we even need motions to adjourn? Non-debatable motion to adjourn from anybody, anybody? Karen's nodding. That looks like a yes. Thumbs up. Susan, are you giving it a second? Absolutely. All in, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, nobody abstained. Thank you all. Thanks for the engaged conversation today and for making space for one another. And this for me was a topic I was really feeling nervous about, and I'm really appreciative of everybody's ability to represent the community voices and to have such a productive conversation today. Thank you all. Bye.